Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in AP English, and we turn now in our study of the Odyssey to Book 7. Phaeacia's Halls and Gardens is the way that Fagles will title this chapter. Really quickly, if you haven't been following our stuff, at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, find the AP folder, and there you will see our full lectures on already the Iliad, and now books 1 through 6 of the Odyssey. Let's do a real quick review of where we've been, as we always like to do at the beginning of our lectures, just to place ourselves as we get ready for Book 7. Book 1, we have, of course, the invocation of the Muse. We hear that this guy named Odysseus is going to be a man of twists and turns in any number of ways. We meet Athena, who will come to Ithaca as Mentis will inspire Telemachus with his mission. At line 340 of Book 1, it's time to grow up. Then in Book 2, we will have Telemachus, who tries to grow up. Duty calls the assembly, but people, the suitors, are going to treat him really badly. They'll make fun of him. He's kind of humiliated. However, in the middle of this conversation, you'll remember that the eagles will collide and have their fight, as interpreted as a sign that Odysseus will someday return. He will leave, Telemachus will leave with Mentor, who is actually Athena. The role Athena plays will continue to be important in almost every book of these early books of the Odyssey. Athena will play a pivotal role. Telemachus in Book 3 will leave. He will go to Pylos, where he will meet Nestor. There, he will have exchanges with Nestor. Athena will change into an eagle and fly away, leaving Nestor to say to Telemachus, "You have tremendous good fortune." Right? Telemachus will leave with Pisistratus, the son of Nestor, and off they will go, headed towards Menelaus and Helen, and of course Sparta. Book 4, Telemachus is there. Put a note to yourself that Book 4 will be important for us as we get ready for Book 7, because some of the experiences that Odysseus' son Telemachus has is in fact going to mirror some of the experiences that Odysseus will have on the island of the Phaeacians. Telemachus shows up. Menelaus' palace is amazing. He and Helen are having double marriages. Life is amazing and great. There we hear stories. Helen does something interesting. She drugs the men that are there because they get kind of sad thinking about the terrible war at Troy. And then we get a couple of stories about Odysseus that are fascinating. And then, of course, we hear the story of how Menelaus, through Protus, will hear that, in fact, Odysseus is maybe still alive, stuck on an island with a nymph. Meanwhile, Book 4, back on Ithaca, the suitors are going to plan and plot to kill Telemachus, and Penelope is going to be worried about Telemachus, obviously. Book 5 will then bring to a close the Telemache, those 4 books that tell about Telemachus and his buildings Rome, and that notion that this coming-of-age story. Book 5, we're going to be on Calypso's island, and here, of course, we will have Odysseus. He will be able to leave, so we're told. We have Hermes sent from Mount Olympus, telling Calypso, "You've got to let the man go." The raft is built. Onto the ocean he goes, Odysseus. Poseidon tries to drown him, and here he will wash up on the island of the Phaeacians. Book 6 will put Odysseus then face to face with Alcinous, the king of Phaeacia, his young daughter Narcissa. Here we're going to have those 2 amazing rhetorical speeches as we shared in our lecture on Odysseus, on Odyssey 6. And then Narcissa will give her instructions, so she kind of takes over. And one of the things that you'll remember she says is, hang out in Athena's garden here in the orchard, and then let me go in on my own, and then you come in on your own, and that way you can go and make supplication to especially my mother. As we begin Book 7, I want to reflect for a moment on what Achilles had to say at the conclusion of the Iliad in Book 24, when he was having his conversation with Priam, king of Troy, and he said, "In Mount Olympus, Zeus has 2 jars. One, blessings. The other, all of the evils. The options are 3. A man, a woman, in their life can have just stuff from the bad stuff jar. That is a cursed life. And nobody can imagine that life being anything but horrific. Then, second option, it's called the human's life. There's some good, there's some bad. It's called a mix. It's called our lives. There is a suggestion that there is a third option, and that is to have only and always all of the good stuff. But that is only the life of the gods who live on Mount Olympus. However, Homer in the Odyssey, in Book 7, will play an interesting game with us. What would it look like to live in paradise on earth? And his answer is the island of the Phaeacians. Stuck out in the middle of nowhere, these people live this unbelievably beautiful, pristine, innocent kind of lifestyle. And we will call it, of course, in later language, El Dorado. If we're playing the game of Milton in Paradise Lost, we will call it, of course, Paradise or Eden. So let's go through it, all right? First of all, at the beginning of Book 7, we're told that Nausicaa will go to her bedroom and there will take her meal. She does not go anywhere near her mother and father. She's going to stay out of it and let Odysseus show up at in the court all on his own. Athena then, as a young girl, will lead Odysseus through the city and she'll shroud him in a mist, right? She takes Odysseus to the palace in this mist and she reminds him, find the queen, Erte, by the way, in Greek, very similar to the word for prayer or supplication, right? And she is a resolver of conflict, this amazing woman, right? And here again, one more time, the Odyssey is a poem that is infatuated with women and the feminine. And that's what makes this poem so amazing in my estimation. When we put it up next to the Iliad is a man's poem. The Odyssey is a beautiful feminine poem in so many ways. And to that degree here, go and find the queen. Bypass the king, Alcinous, and go right to the queen, Erte. And this is, in fact, what Odysseus will do. However, before we have this interesting moment when he stands and he marvels at the palace of the Phaeacians. It's an incredible palace. He's blown away, reminding us of Telemachus when he saw Menelaus' palace in Book 4. Same gig going on, right? Then we will have Odysseus in mist being led through the palace, and all of a sudden the mist goes away and he is at Erte, the queen's knees, and he is begging for mercy and for supplication. He then, after he asks if it's possible that he could be allowed to go home, he lies down in the ashes. There's an old man there, Ascanius, who will in fact be kind of like the advisor to Alcinous, and he will say, this is not the way to treat a stranger. We have to practice proper xenia. Remember that notion of hospitality, right? And Alcinous then will raise up Odysseus. He will say, wine for everyone. And he says about Odysseus, this man must be a god. Odysseus will respond, I am no god. The question of who Odysseus is, who are you, is going to be central to our reading of the Odyssey, as we already said. Erte, however, will notice the clothes that Odysseus has on. They look a whole lot like the clothes that she made for her daughter Nausicaa. And she will ask, where'd you get these clothes? Odysseus then will tell his story. This is a prefiguration of the flashback stories that he will tell in books 9 through 12, okay? The major part of the Odyssey of those flashbacks. We get a little mini version of that, kind of setting us up for that. And Odysseus tells his story, and he says, your daughter gave me these clothes out of the generosity, and she gave me instruction as well about how to approach you and the like. Alcinous at first is kind of upset, and he says, my daughter didn't lead you in here, what's up with that? But it's Odysseus who says, no, that was my idea. He kind of switches the story a bit, and he says, this was so there would be no untoward understandings. Alcinous will say a couple of things. He says, I'm not a man who would have cared about something like that, but he says, if you want to marry my daughter, Nausicaa, I'll allow that to happen. And he says, for sure, we'll let you sail. We'll sail you home, no question. At the very end of Book 7, then, everybody goes to bed, setting us up for Book 8 and the games that will follow. So that's the brief review. Let's turn now to the text itself. And this is a wonderful book to read. And again, as I have said to you before, The hope for us is that you're reading this stuff on your own, and then you're coming to the study with my help, right? Just to remind, our learning theory is always asking that we're connecting new information to old information in meaningful ways. We do that through our annotative approach by asking 3 guiding questions. At level 1, what does the text say? Summary. At level 2, what does the text mean? 2A, themes, messages. 2B, that's the rhetorical stuff. Not what Homer says, but how he says it. And for us, we're looking at 2B from 2 perspectives, like we did with our study of the Iliad. Symbolism and irony. We'll see some of both here, no question. Finally, at level 3, we ask, how can I relate to this information in some meaningful way? At 3A, how can I relate to first of all, the Iliad? Since we've studied it, let's look at it and see some similarities. We've already made those observations already. For example, the 2 jars of Zeus from Iliad 24 informs our reading of no question, Odyssey 7 here. And then we'll, of course, ask about other texts that we're familiar with. Finally, we'll ask at 3B, how can I relate to this information personally? And you're noticing in all these lectures, I'm always asking, can you come up with some way to relate to this information personally so that it makes more sense? We hope that you can do that as well here. Okay, let's begin, first of all, right away with the opening lines of Book 7. And I just want to point out that when we're told at line 5 or 6 that Nausicaa goes back to her bedroom, there her chambermaid lit a fire for her, Eurymedusa. Eurymedusa is the nurse, we're told, the old woman who'd come from Eperia years ago when the rolling ships had sailed her in, and the country picked her out as King Alcinous's prize, which is interesting. One more time, women as prize. By the way, just make a note to yourself in your notes that if Eurymedusa is the nurse for Nausicaa, then remember that Eurycleia is the nurse for Telemachus. Notice their names also very similar, right? So we have kind of a pattern going on here. Again, although never mentioned in the Odyssey, many of my students have imagined that after the fact that Telemachus and Nausicaa would end up being a thing, because obviously she can't marry Odysseus, he's already got a wife and he's much older, right? We'll then, at line 30, we'll hear Athena as a little girl playing the role of guide. One more time, Odysseus being guided by women, and especially young girls. Notice all of the women in this story already. I know we think of who helps him with the scarf. Nausicaa, obviously, and now here Athena as little girl. Odysseus has no problem with this kind of thing. At line 30, the little girl, Athena, says, "Oh, sir, good old stranger, I'll show you the very palace that you're after. The king lives right beside my noble father. Come, quietly too, and I will lead the way. Now, not a glance at anyone, not a question." And then she says something interesting. Remember, they live out in the middle of nowhere, kind of like where we live here in New Orleans, right? The men here never suffer fools or strangers gladly, have no love for hosting a man from foreign lands. By the way, the word xenia, guest-host relationship, that is to say to be hospitable, when we put phobia with it, we have xenophobia, which is fear of foreigners. And she says, you're going to have to be careful about this as you walk through, okay? Once you get to the castle, though, to the palace, you're going to get helped, no question. All they really trust, we're told, are their fast-flying ships that cross the mighty ocean. Then, gifts of Poseidon. Ah, what ships they are, quick as a bird, quick as a darting thought. It's an interesting bit of little simile, quick as a darting thought. 2 observations here. 1, of course, Odysseus is going to love to hear that he's on an island where people have great ships and they can maybe sail him home. 2, the fact that the Phaeacians are going to show proper xenia to Odysseus will ultimately lead to their being damaged, right? They're going to be hurt by Poseidon in his rage. And of course, Zeus will allow it to happen. We'll come back to this one as we go, right? Next, we will have the Athena continuing as she talks about what's about to happen. At line 55 or so, you're going to find, she says, when you go into the palace, you're going to find our princes, dear to the god, busy feasting. Scholars pointed out from the very beginning, this is a poem about lots and lots of eating and the good things of life. You go on inside, be bold, sounding very much like she would say to Telemachus. Nothing to fear. In every venture, the bold man comes off best, even the wanderer bound from distant shores. This notion of being bold or being confident is a central motif of the Odyssey. Let's put it in our notes. The idea, you got to try stuff, right? If you're ever going to make it through, you got to be willing to have enough confidence to try. Be bold, be resolute, in other words. The queen is the first you'll light on in the halls. Erte, she's called, and earns the name. She answers all our prayers. In the Greek, the word Erte comes very closely to prayers. She comes, in fact, from the same stock, right, of King Alcinoüs. And we're told a little bit later at line 75 or so, no woman is honored on earth of all the wives now keeping households under their household sway as much as Erte. Such is her pride of place and always will be so. Dear to her loving children, he's already met Nausicaa, right? To Alcinous himself and all our people, they gaze on her as a god, saluting her warmly on her walks through town. She lacks nothing in good sense and judgment. She can dissolve quarrels. We think about the quarrel in the Iliad that started with Agamemnon and Achilles. We think about other quarrels that are a part of the Iliad. Here, one of the things that makes Erte so amazing is she resolves conflict. She resolves quarrels, even among men, whoever wins her sympathies. And so we're told right away that this is the suggestion that will happen. Next, we will have, of course, the amazing palace. Thinking very much like Telemachus's view of Menelaus' palace, this palace is amazing. Roughly line 100, a radiance strong as the moon or rising sun came flooding through the high-roofed halls of generous King Alcinoüs. And then we're going to get all kinds of descriptions. I won't read all of this. I wish I could. I just don't have the time. We've got all of the different metals. We've got gold. We've got bronze. We've got silver. We've got gold dogs who stand as statues, as guard dogs. We have feast that flows on forever. Drinking, dining. A feast flowed on forever, we're told, right? We have 50 serving women. We have lots of women who are weaving at their webs. This, of course, is a motif we've mentioned, right? And then we're told at line 125, just as Phaeacian men excel the world at sailing, driving their swift ships on the open seas, so the women excel at all the arts of weaving. That is Athena's gift to them beyond all others. A genius for lovely work and a fine mind, too. So in other words, we're told that in the land of the Phaeacians, that both the men and the women are equally celebrated. Again, this will be our notion of Eden, our notion of El Dorado, that idea of the perfect place, right? We're told right outside the castle, there's this amazing orchard, which will remind us immediately, for example, of the Iliad and King Priam's amazing orchard. And you'll even remember, ironically, in Iliad 21, Lycaon, the son of Priam, is that one young man who had been caught by Achilles, ransomed, had escaped, come back, and now just a few days later was ready to be killed by Achilles one more time. Bad luck. You'll maybe remember that Achilles took Lycaon the first time. Where? In the orchard, that amazing orchard that was outside of Troy. I think it is intentional that the poet, Homer, whoever he or she is, right, that the poet wants us to make these connections between Phaeacia, the land of the Phaeacians, and this amazing palace, and this amazing city, and Troy, before the Greeks arrived especially. So for example, Nausicaa will come to mind with, for example, Priam's daughter Cassandra. I think there's reason to make those connections. Before the Greeks arrived at Troy, it was an amazing place. This is said and referenced several times in the Iliad. Certainly we have it here, right? We're told that in this orchard, we have trees that never die. We have trees that harvest all year round. We have an amazing teeming vineyard for the grapes, planted for kings. We have 2 springs, one rippling in channels at line 150, and the other over the whole orchard. And immediately we think of the 2 springs that are part of the right outside of Troy, same game being played, right? And then we're told, such were the gifts, at line 155, the glories showered down by the gods on King Alcinoüs' realm. And there Odysseus stood, gazing at all this bounty, a man who had borne so much. In the Fagles translation, actually, at roughly line 97, you actually have, even before Odysseus crossed the bronze threshold, and then you have ellipsis, and then you have this long description that will run up until right at line 158 or so, okay? And once, we're told, he had taken in his fill of marveling at it all. He crossed the threshold quickly, and strode inside the palace. So here we go, Odysseus inside the palace of the Phaeacians. Here, he found the Phaeacian lords and captains tipping out libations now to the guide and giant killer Hermes, the god to whom they would always pour the final cup before they sought their beds. In other words, here at the end of the day, Odysseus comes into the palace, and the first thing he notices is reverence for the gods. So the poet Homer is making a clear point here for us that the ideal Edenic kind of perfect place, El Dorado again, or in this case, again, the notion of the Phaeacians and where they live. The ideal world is defined by reverence for the gods, and therefore the gods take care of them, right? To continue, Odysseus went on. Striding down the hall, the man of many struggles, shrouded still in the mist, Athena drifted round him, till he reached Erte and Alcinous the king. And then, the moment he flung his arms around Aertes' knees, the God-sent mist rolled back to reveal the great man. I mean, it's very iconic, right? I mean, all of a sudden, here's this guy, and he's on his knees in front of the queen, holding on to her legs. Silence seized the feasters all along the halls, line 170. Seeing him right before their eyes, they marveled, gazing on him now as Odysseus pleaded. And now Odysseus will speak. Queen Erte, daughter of godlike King Rexnor, here, after many trials, I come to beg for mercy. Your husbands, yours, and all these feasters here. May the gods endow them with fortune all their lives. May each hand down to his sons the riches in his house, and the pride of place the realm has granted him. But as for myself, grant me a rapid convoy home to my own native land. How far away I've been from all my loved ones, how long I have suffered. Notice, for Odysseus, it's always about two things. Getting home and talking about the fact that he suffered. Pleading so, the man, Odysseus, sank down in the ashes. We think about Priam, for example, falling down to the ground in his sorrow after his son Hector is dead. We think about Achilles falling down to the ground after he is told that his lover friend Patroclus is dead. Same thing, sinking down to the ashes.